Yeah. Well, and that's a big piece of the anti-racist platform, right? Which is a big
Right.
discussion out there. And
Right.
he talked about that too. He said, I'm not necessarily preaching anti-racism, but the notion is correct.
Mm-hmm.
Is that if you're not actually helping, then you are hurting the cause. And that was part of my own willful ignorance, I guess, was
But I
I didn't
love
look
that you're, but I love that you're, and I didn't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry, but I love that you're willfully ignorant, because I think so many other people out there think that they are not ignorant, or they think that they understand because they know a Black person, or they have a Black friend,
right.
or
Right.
they adopted some Black kids. I think that they really feel like they may understand, or they're going to make the world better in this capacity. But it really is important for you to understand that race
Right.
is a social construct and racism does exist in America. And I think
Yep.
if you don't seek to understand, like you've said many times, I have so much reading to do. Like,
Yeah.
Keisha, I didn't know any of this,
Yeah.
And I'm like, imagine being in a position to where you are totally oblivious to this, and I was birthed into it. So
Correct.
I have been coached and trained on how to approach this, and how to look at this, and how to avoid this, and how to be this way since I breathed my first breath on this earth.
Yeah. Well, that's also why I think that the books written by the men that I've mentioned,
Mm-hmm.
and women too. I haven't read a lot on females' point of view, Kimberly Crenshaw and folks like that. But the idea there, meaning that Ta-Nehisi Coates has been a big.
Mm-hmm.
I love his prose. He's such a brilliant writer. He's poetic, and he's very kind of an ode to W.E. Du Bois. And between me and the world was so powerful because it talked to a lot of the things that Dax talked about, which is, and this
Are
is
you
one.
talking about the coffee coats?
Yeah, Between Me and the World, the book of
Okay.
Ta-Nehisi Coates, and what he talked about, what they had in common with their stories, and this is kind of the bigger narrative on that, is that, and this is what I've said to a couple people on the Critical Race Theory episode, there's been a lot of comments that, CRT is racist and it's wrong. And so I'm going back, and one of the commenters said to me the other day, please, give me an example of racism. Give me an example of systemic racism. Give me an example of institutional racism. And I was like, wow, we're still here. And this was he was a very cordial person. He wasn't calling me names, and he seemed educated, and he had nice language, and it was cool. But that was an example for me that if you read James Baldwin, and if you read Ta-Nehisi Coates, and if you read Medgar Evers, and if you read MLK, and the stories are all the same. So there's no way you could conflate these stories, because they're so identical in many of specifically in the meta narrative. It's just, there's racism.
Yeah.
It's not a debate. And one thing that seems to be a reoccurring theme in all of them is they don't own their own bodies. And that was one thing I didn't get, previous. And that's why I wanted to kind of start there, was that Dax actually said that his father, he was playing in a park, and I'm paraphrasing him.
Mm-hmm.
He was playing in a park, and he ran off the playground with a friend, and they were doing nothing. His daddy didn't know where he was, and his dad was terrified. And when he got back, he actually slapped him with a belt on the rear end. And he tried to instill within him that white people can take your soul with no ramifications. And this was when he was a young boy, 8, 9 years old. And he needed to remind his son that he did not own his body. And I was like, I don't even know what that means. And that's the same thing that Ta-Nehisi Coates says, the same thing Baldwin talks about. And what that really means was represented in, fast forward to when Dax was in law school, that's exactly what happened to him. He didn't own his body.
Right. And it's still happening. I mean,
yeah, every day.
There's countless Ahmaud Arbery, there's countless incidents where it's still happening. I think at the end of this book, he mentions when he has a daughter, all he sees is Breonna Taylor. And so yeah. I immediately connected with that, because I have a son, and all I think about is, and mind you, we're talking in suburbia. I live in the suburbs. He lives in a very nice area. Like, we're not talking in your stereotypical, like the neighborhood you described in your prologue, right? We're not talking in a stereotypical environment. We're talking in an environment that provides the safest, most secure, most stable community setting, HOAs and all of that,
Right.
fees every
Right.
month. I mean, but all I think is Ahmaud Arbery. Like, what if my kid goes running one day because he's training or
Right.
he's going to the gym? Mom, can I run to the gym? Can I run to the park? And
Right.
this has happened. This has happened in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
This has happened in my neighborhood. I have two friends. A friend, she has twin girls. She's at the park with her girls, and a big F-250 rolls by, 2 Confederate flags.
Yeah.
And this is what they're screaming out of the window. And how do you explain this to your children? This is right here in my neighborhood. This happened less than a year ago.
Yes, that's well, that's kind of that's what I'm hoping to do with this platform. And I guess to analyze my motive, the original idea for this platform is just to talk about really deep topics that can't be discussed on Facebook and Twitter, right? They're just too long. The long form content is necessary to kind of take back and forth, and then actually do some homework and understand that all of these things are part and parcel to our culture today. And a lot of things that Dax brought up in his book, specifically the systemic racism of the 80s and Reagan and what took place with the welfare queen and narrative, and the court systems. That was one of the reasons I was laughing, I think, inappropriately, was we talked about the fact that Thurgood Marshall was replaced by Clarence Thomas. And again, it's a nervous reaction, because it's like, that's, as I said to him, it's existentially cruel that happened in so many areas. And that's a big piece of where I think our culture gets lost, when they say that racism was in the past and that it's no longer here because we've had a black president, we have a black secretary of defense, we have black executives, we have, let's just say, a lot more success than we used to have within the black community, but it's not on par by any standard